Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Imagine paying for your son's entire college education while your ex tells him she helped pay for half. That's exactly what happened in today's story. And on graduation day, the truth finally came out. Let's dive in.
My son called me 2 days before his graduation to ask if I'd be sitting next to his mother at the ceremony. I told him I didn't know where his mother planned to sit. He went quiet for a moment and then said, "She told me she helped pay for school, Dad. She said you two split it." I sat with that for a second. 4 years of tuition, room, board, books. Every bill had come to my address. Every payment had come from my account. I had the receipts, literally, in a folder in my filing cabinet. I hadn't told Tyler any of this because I didn't want him walking across a stage thinking about his parents' money war. I'd wanted him to just be proud. "We'll talk after the ceremony," I said. That was a mistake. I should have said it right then, but I didn't, and what happened in the next 48 hours changed everything between the three of us, and ended something I hadn't even realized was still going on. Before I get into how it unfolded, you need to understand something about the kind of woman Diane is. She is not a villain. She doesn't twirl a mustache. She is charming at parties, good at keeping in touch with people she wants to keep in touch with, and completely capable of rewriting her own history so that it flatters her without technically lying. I'd watched her do it for 16 years of marriage, not maliciously, just reflexively. It was how she managed the gap between who she was and who she wanted to be. I had learned to live with that. What I hadn't accounted for was her doing it about money, to our son, 4 years after I'd written every check. Diane and I divorced when Tyler was 15. It wasn't ugly the way some divorces are. No screaming matches in parking lots, no lawyers playing hardball for sport. We just ran out of things to hold us together. She wanted a different life than the one we'd built, and eventually she stopped pretending otherwise. We split the house equity, agreed on a reasonable arrangement for Tyler's remaining years at home, and shook hands on it. I actually respected how clean she kept it. She remarried within 2 years, a man named Gerald who had a boat and a place in Florida and apparently very little interest in step-parenting a teenager. Tyler spent his junior and senior years mostly at my house. I didn't complain. I liked having him around. When Tyler got into state, Diane and I sat down, just once, to talk about how we'd handle tuition. Gerald made good money. She had gone back to work part-time, and I had a decent income from the contracting business I'd spent 20 years building. I expected a real conversation about splitting costs. What I got instead was a list of reasons why her financial situation had become complicated. Gerald's boat had needed major repairs. There were some credit card balances she was working through. She cut her hours at work because of some knee trouble. She kept her voice reasonable and her face apologetic, and at the end of it, she said she thought she could probably contribute something each semester once she got things sorted out. I said fine. I told her not to worry about it. I said I'd cover Tyler's costs and we could revisit it later. Later never came. 4 years passed. I wrote checks to the university twice a year for tuition. I direct deposit money into Tyler's account every month for his rent and groceries. I bought his textbooks through the university portal and mailed him $100 cash on his birthday every year so he'd have something to spend on himself. Diane sent him a card. I know because Tyler mentioned it once, in passing, the way you mention things that don't require a reaction. I never said anything negative about her to Tyler. I want to be clear about that. Whatever my private feelings were, and some months when I looked at my bank balance, they were not charitable. I kept them to myself. Tyler loved his mother. That wasn't going to change, and I wasn't going to try to change it. But I also never told him the full picture. I figured he knew enough to know that his mother wasn't exactly present. I thought kids were observant. I underestimated how good a story can sound when only one person is telling it. Graduation weekend. Tyler had tickets for 4 guests, and he'd given them to me, my sister Carol, my mother, and Diane. He had not given one to Gerald, which I thought showed good judgment. I drove down Friday night and checked into a hotel near campus. Tyler came by around 8 and we got dinner, just the 2 of us. And I could see he was proud of himself in the way that you only are when you know you earned something. He'd finished with a 3.4 GPA in civil engineering. He had a job lined up. He looked like a man.
He brought up the money thing at dinner. He said his mother had mentioned at some point recently that she'd been helping cover his costs throughout school. He didn't say it accusingly. He said it almost like a question, like he was waiting for me to confirm a story he'd heard and wasn't sure he believed. I asked him when she'd told him that. He said she'd brought it up a few weeks ago when they had lunch together. She said she and I had always maintained a sort of financial partnership for his education, even after the divorce. She made it sound collaborative. She had apparently described it as something they'd discussed and agreed upon, a mature arrangement between two people who put their son first. She had used the phrase, We always made sure Tyler had what he needed, and Tyler had walked away from that lunch thinking his parents were the rare divorced couple who handled things gracefully together. What burned me wasn't that she'd taken credit, it was that the story she'd told him had made him feel grateful to both of us equally. He'd come into this weekend thinking I'd done my half and she'd done hers. And wasn't that nice? Weren't his parents decent people? I had spent 4 years being the decent person. I hadn't asked for a medal. But I also hadn't signed up to hand half my credit to someone who hadn't shown up. I kept my voice level. I told him we'd talk about it Saturday, after everything. He nodded. He trusted me. That's the part that stayed with me all night. He trusted me, which meant if I stayed quiet too long, I was going to let that trust get misplaced. Saturday morning, I went to my car and got the folder I had brought from home. I don't know exactly when I had decided to bring it. Maybe when he first called me 2 days earlier. Maybe I had always known this day was coming and I just hadn't let myself think about it. My accountant had once told me years ago to keep payment records on anything significant. I'd always thought he meant for tax purposes. It turned out he meant for moments exactly like this one. The folder had 4 years of payment confirmations, bank statements with the relevant transactions highlighted, and the original email thread from when Diane and I had discussed contributions at the start of Tyler's freshman year. The thread where she had written clearly that she would try to help when her situation improved, and I had written back that I understood. I sat with that folder in my lap for a while in the parking garage. I thought about what kind of man I wanted Tyler to see his father as. Not someone who weaponized old emails at his kid's graduation, but also not someone who let a lie stand because confronting it was uncomfortable. I put the folder in my jacket's interior pocket and went to find my seat. The ceremony was long the way all ceremonies are long. I sat with my mother and Carol. Diane sat 2 rows behind us with a woman I didn't recognize, probably a friend. We nodded at each other when we made eye contact. It was fine. It has always been fine on the surface. When Tyler's name was called, I stood up without meaning to. My mother grabbed my arm and laughed. He walked across the stage with that flat calm he's had since he was a kid, the kind that looks like boredom but is actually just steadiness, and he shook the dean's hand and held up his diploma and looked out at the crowd for us. I waved. He grinned. That was the moment I had paid for, all of it. We went to lunch after. Tyler, me, my mother, Carol, and Diane. Gerald had driven down that morning, and he sat at the end of the table quietly eating a club sandwich. Diane was warm and chatty and talked about how proud she was and how fast the time had gone. At some point, Tyler brought it up himself. He looked at both of us and said he wanted to understand what each of us had contributed over the past 4 years because he wanted to thank us properly. Diane started to speak. I took the folder out of my pocket and set it on the table. She stopped. I didn't say anything dramatic. I didn't need to. I just said, "This is the full payment history for Tyler's education. Every tuition payment, every monthly deposit, every book charge. I kept records because I keep records of everything. You're welcome to look at it." Tyler picked it up. He spent about 3 minutes going through it at the table in silence while the rest of us found things to look at that weren't each other. My mother looked at her water glass. Carol looked at her phone. Gerald studied the menu he'd already ordered from. Diane said quietly that she had intended to contribute, that things had been difficult, that she thought she'd made that clear. Tyler looked at her. He asked her why she had told him at their lunch a few weeks ago that she and his dad had shared the costs. She said she might have been unclear. He asked her to be clear now. She said she hadn't been able to contribute the way she'd hoped. He nodded slowly. He looked at me. He said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I told him I didn't want it to affect his relationship with his mother. I told him that was my choice to make, not his, and if I did it wrong, I was sorry.
He sat with that. Then he said he appreciated it, but he also would have appreciated knowing the truth. He was right. I told him so. Diane left before dessert came. She said goodbye to Tyler warmly, kissed his cheek, and told him she was proud of him. He hugged her back. He is a better person than most, including me. Gerald followed her out. He shook Tyler's hand first, which I thought was decent of him. He said nothing to me, which I thought was also decent of him. Whatever Gerald knew or didn't know about the finances, he had read the room well enough to understand this wasn't his moment. After they left, the table got lighter. My mother ordered pie. Carol told a story about her own college graduation that somehow involved a horse, which I had heard before but didn't stop her. Tyler laughed. It felt like a real celebration for the first time that day, with the thing that had been sitting underneath everything finally said out loud and accounted for. After she was gone, my mother patted my hand and said nothing, which is the highest praise she gives. Carol, who is less restrained, said "good" under her breath, and then pretended she hadn't. Tyler and I walked to our cars together after lunch. He asked me how much it had all totaled over 4 years. I told him. He was quiet for a moment, not shocked, I think, but doing the math, putting numbers to something he'd understood abstractly. Then he said he'd pay me back when he could. I told him he absolutely would not. He laughed, which was the right response. We stood in the parking lot for a few minutes, not really talking, the way you do when neither person wants to be the first to leave. He mentioned his job start date. I told him I'd help him move his stuff in August. He said he'd been thinking about getting a dog once he was settled, and I told him a dog was a significant responsibility, and he said he was aware, Dad. And that was enough. It was enough to stand there and argue about nothing for a few minutes in a parking lot because we were both still there, and the day hadn't broken anything between us. I drove home that night thinking about what I'd been holding for 4 years, all those payment receipts in a manila folder, and why I'd finally put them on the table. I hadn't done it for myself. I'd told myself that, and I think I even believed it. But I also know that there's a version of letting something go gracefully, and there's a version of letting a lie keep growing because you're afraid of the mess. I had confused the two for a long time. I'd told myself I was protecting Tyler by staying quiet, and maybe I was, partly. But I was also protecting myself from an uncomfortable conversation, and I'd dressed that up as generosity. The folder had been in my filing cabinet for 4 years. I had not put it there by accident. Tyler called me when he got back to his apartment that night. He didn't say much. He just said he'd seen who showed up, and he wouldn't forget it. That was enough. It was exactly enough. I don't know what happens next between Tyler and his mother. That's not my story to control. She will probably call him next week, and they will talk, and she will say something that smooths things over enough for them to keep going, because that is what she does, and because Tyler loves her and will let her. I'm not going to get in the way of that. But he knows what he knows now. He's got the folder because I gave it to him before he drove away. He'll keep it or he'll throw it out. That's his call. What matters is he doesn't have to take anyone's word for anything anymore, including mine.